This is, I think, the central problem that we're struggling with is all of these companies, all of these governments, everybody who has any sort of aspiration to power is recognizing that understanding as much as possible about as many as possible is the lever of influence. We see target news, we see this being used to write news, we see this being used to change politics, we see this being used to try to influence purchasing decisions, right? All of these things are about shaping human behavior. And all of these things, which I would argue are fundamentally anti-democratic forces, and actually I would argue these are anti-social forces, are really about shaping the behavior of other people to your benefit, right? And if this can be done secretly, if this can be done privately, all the better. And when I look at this, and I think about my own history, and I think about what's happening on the internet, I think one of the biggest vulnerabilities in our system, right, the vulnerability that's being exploited by all of these forces, is identity. In the modern world, we are not permitted a sense of ownership without identity. To be able to make a trade in many cases, and God, if you live in some place like Sweden where they're trying to get rid of cash, right, you've got to use a card. The card is connected to your bank account. That goes on. If you're trying to buy something like property, right, how are they even going to register that? They need you to show your ID. They need you to get it stamped. You go to the people at the desk. The people at the desk then bless you to be able to participate in this transaction. If you want to be able to buy a bottle of water at the gas station, this has been and should be a cash transaction. It should be traceless. But now, increasingly, there's cards involved. Now, increasingly, there's cameras involved. Now, increasingly, there's Bluetooth beacons in the store that look at your phone and they see, oh, it's got its Bluetooth active because it was just connected to its car, so we know it's this device. We've seen this device at this mall. They've got license plate readers. All of these things form a big constellation of richness, especially when compounded with the fact that your cell phone is constantly, 100% of the time that it's turned on, screaming out into the sky, here I am, register me to the nearest tower. And then they're tracking where this goes. And all of these things mean we're never anonymous, we're never just a person, we're always this specific entity. And if we are this specific entity, we can be nudged, we can be shifted, we can be shaped by all of these people because we have universally unique identifiers. Now, programmers, developers, they love universally or globally unique identifiers, right? They want their metrics, they want their analytics, they want to see what's happening on, this app push, they want to see what's happening on this kind of device. And so they collect everyone from everything, for everything from everyone, everywhere, right? That's no different than what the NSA does. That's no different what Facebook does. That's no different than what Google does. And they do it because it grants them increased power, right? They can be better developers, and I understand that. I'm sympathetic to that. But I think we need to sit back and really take a look at the fact that when we are gating access to the infrastructure that's necessary for life through this process of proving who you are, rather than proving a right to use, right, that you paid for this, that you should be able to access to this, that you have a blinded token of some type that could belong to anyone, but it's the digital equivalent of cash that's going, look, it doesn't matter who I am, I'm allowed to be here, right? I'm basically supporting the infrastructure, I've done my part. That's all it should be. Because otherwise we're being forced to give up ownership of our identities. We're giving up ownership of our histories, right? We're allowing others to control the story of our private lives. They get to shape it, they get to tell it, they get to say, this is the narrative of this person, this phone, this car, this whatever, this browser, right? And when we have this pervasive collection of, sorry, not pervasive collection, but this pervasive creation of records, what we fundamentally have is the disempowerment of the individual, and we have the empowerment of the institution. And you know, a lot of people are fans of institutions, and institutions have done a lot of good throughout history, but they've also done a lot of bad. And the question is, what happens when you have institutions that are so strong that there is no alternative? What happens when you have institutions around the world in every country and don't even answer to your country, right? It's like a Mark Zuckerberg who won't go and talk to UK Parliament because he doesn't care about UK Parliament. He'll just send some lackey, right? And the people of these countries, they ask why? Why do you do this? How do we change this? We don't like this. And he can simply respond, well, that's the way it is, because I said so. I'm the one in charge. We need to be able to create data, right? Move data, process data, and transact on this data without creating a history that it happened. And what I mean by a history that it happened is I mean the history of you, connecting the person to the thing. The transaction does not need to belong to you. The transaction belongs to itself. You know, you can balance the books without knowing everything's connected to everyone, and I know a lot of you guys believe in this. But I'm afraid that we see a lot of people who don't believe in it enough. One of the biggest criticisms that I have of the Bitcoin blockchain today is the fact that it's not at all private. They're not even pretending to try to be private. There are arguments, and I know there are proposals, that they're going to try to bring things on chain. They're going to try to integrate, you know, these enhancement proposals or improvement proposals. But they're not fast enough. We've seen this happening for years. Everybody knows the problems. We see the KYC sort of cancer spreading across the entire ecosystem, where now there are no on-ramps and off-ramps of any meaningful size. That will allow a normal individual, a teenager right now, who doesn't even have a bank account, to go, I want to buy Bitcoin, right? And you guys who are working on alternatives, you can do better, right? And as you do better, that will pressure the bigger actors to do better. Because again, it's about the incentives and disincentives in the system. If you build a better model, and no one else is willing to reform their own model, you become the standard model, and that's a good thing for you. But even if you don't become, you know, the new unicorn, whatever, who cares? Your decisions in designing these things create pressure on those incumbents to reform. Even in failing, you can win for the world, for the community, even if you don't win for yourself personally. And that's what got me out of paradise in Hawaii in 2013. Was I thought, look, you know, I didn't graduate from high school, guys. I'm largely self-taught. And I was doing all right. You know, I'm not going to say I'm the world's greatest anything, but I was doing all right. I was pretty good. And somehow, I ended up working for the government, worked for the CIA. They put me overseas. I was undercover, you know, living as a diplomat in Switzerland. I went over to Japan working as a contractor for the NSA. And each time I moved, I got more and more seniority. I got more and more pay until eventually I ended up in Hawaii with the woman I love, doing a job that was like so ridiculously undemanding in the Office of Information Sharing that I had time to do anything I wanted, and that meant reading. And so what I did was I read what was going on everywhere, because it was the first position I had where I could truly read without lines, because in the intelligence community, right, there's very much this because I said so kind of worldview, where there's a system called compartmentalization or compartmentation, where the person in this office isn't supposed to know what the person in this office is doing. You're not supposed to be curious. You're not supposed to even ask, because you don't have a need to know, right? Well, when I worked in the CIA and when I worked in the NSA previously, as a technologist, as a systems administrator, I had broad access, much broader access than other people. And I could read many different things. So I already knew a lot about what's going on relative to the average person. But when I reached the Office of Information Sharing, of which I was the only employee, I was the Office of Information Sharing, now I had basically the same access to go around and read whatever I wanted as the director of the NSA. And so what did I do? I wrote some scrapers, and I started to see everything that was out there. And everything got centralized in Hawaii. And this was so I could share it out and create a little system that showed people this goes here and this goes there, and this might be useful for you in your office and that office. But I got to see what was going on in every office. And there weren't a lot of people in NSA who got to see this.